I feel like my job is I'm the converter to all these
Okay.
individuals who've not done subsects, but so far it's gone good. We have not had a single horror story. But let me know if you like it. So far it's been really fun. It's a really robust, informed audience that tunes in. And the longer you stay, the more people show up. And then, like I said, we can share this conversation within about 30 minutes. It'll be in your draft and you can
That's
share it and I
awesome.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. And I was just explaining to my guest, Robbie Jones, that this Substack Live actually is quite useful. Robbie this is the first time Substack Liver. He's a bit nervous. I told him the water is warm. Jump in. The audience is great. Robbie Jones, if you don't know him, you should follow him. Robbie has been doing the good work for a long time. He's a man who grew up. He knows the hymns, grew up in church, grew up in the South, but has used his privilege and his education and his scholarship to talk about the dangers of white supremacy and white Christian nationalism. He is the author of a fantastic book, Hidden Roots of White Supremacy, and you have to subscribe to his excellent Substack, White Too Long. He is also the founder and president of PRRI, which is a go-to source. If you really want to understand the sentiment of religiosity and how it intersects with politics in America, and specifically PRRI, just a couple of days ago had this. I mean, I feel like this is a recurring joke because I've interviewed Robbie a couple of times. I'm like, I'm just waiting for one poll that makes me go to sleep at night. Well, Robbie, but each
Yeah. Not my
poll
job.
each mother effing poll that the PRI drops is just like, man. So Danielle and I, we co-host Democracy Issue. We briefly talked about this poll because a mutual friend sent it to us while we were alive. But the framing of today is how the Republican Party, really, we could say the conservative movement and the Christian right, it's all part of the same Venn diagram, is grooming, and I would say maybe even priming their base for violence. And the violence we've seen, folks, over the weekend. Trump voter, Republican voter, hardcore Christian, Vance Bolter, had a hit list of 70 people, visited four homes. Thankfully, two of those homes were absent, but unfortunately, those other two homes, he shot and killed a representative, injured another two. Folks, again, he had 70 targets, abortion providers, lawmakers, and he was a pretty hardcore Christian, went to the Congo to do his evangelical work. We also saw Christian nationalism, those signs and symbols on January 6th during the failed violent insurrection. We've also seen ICE agents being unleashed. And according to the poll that Robbie hopefully can unpack, you see a lot of support for the ICE agents, not with the American public, but with the Republican base and the Christian nationalists. So, Robbie, with that framing, with that setup, I yield the floor to you, sir. Take it away.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's so glad to be here. And I will say thanks to you again. So when my last book launched, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Past is Sharing American Future, you hosted me at Politics and Prose.
Yes, sir. I remember that.
Thank you for that. So yeah, it's rough out there. I wrote. I think the thing you probably saw was on Blue Sky that I
Yeah.
posted. And there's moments. So I'm my day job at PRI is to be a pollster, right? So I'm plumbing the depths of American public opinion. And I what I put on Blue Sky was there's a moment where you have to kind of sometimes step out of your professional role and the humanity of it hits you, right? Even though you're used to looking at these numbers, and at this point, I shouldn't be surprised really at anything. But I ended up writing on Blue Sky, something like, "Wow, I think it may be impossible to write a survey question that is too brutal for Republicans to support when it has to do with immigrants." And it was just heartbreaking, really. And so we've asked all kinds of questions there, but it was notable to me that so we wrote a question because I wanted to see like, okay, if we really write a question that's about rendition, right? Kind of secreting people off to these black ops sites with no,
Guantanamo Bay.
yeah, right. And without due process, right? So, and so we actually just spelled it out in a polling question. So, like, well, let's just see, like, and so the question is a favor oppose question, and it says, the U.S. government, do you favor or oppose the U.S. government deporting undocumented immigrants to foreign prisons in El Salvador, Rwanda, or Libya without allowing them to challenge their deportation in court? So rendition and no due process. And I was really taken aback. I mean, again, I'm pretty jaded. I've seen a lot of these numbers, and even so, I mean, it took my breath away when I saw the numbers. So it is 78% of Republicans that favor this policy. So nearly 8 in 10 Republicans. And then if you go to, you know, the group that used to call itself values voters and the moral majority, kind of the heart of them, the white evangelical Protestants, it is 2/3 of white evangelical Protestants who say, yeah, we're fine with that. Um,
Wow.
uh, and it's 2/3 of those who qualify as Christian nationalists, adherents, or sympathizers. Like, so it's just so clear that it is this kind of um, far right, and it's like, yeah, we'll strip them of constitutional protections. And then the other thing I linked to on Blue Sky was that there's a series of other questions when I've asked. So again, I mean, I feel like I'm, the word to plumb the depths, right? That metaphor, right, was back, we had, you're trying to make sure your ship wouldn't run aground. You would send somebody over to throw a rope over, and they would send a rock down on a rope to see if they could find the bottom, right? So the ship wouldn't
Yeah.
run aground. And I feel like where's the bottom? I'm trying to find the bottom here, right? By writing these survey questions. So far, I have not found the bottom, right? That you just continue to find. So I just give you two quick examples here. Another question we asked about and you said violence, right? About whether we should put up barriers, right, in rivers. So installing deterrents like walls, barriers in rivers, razor wire to prevent immigrants from entering the country illegally, even if they endanger or kill some people. 77% of Republicans and 74% of white evangelical Protestants say, yep, we're good with that too. And then finally, we even asked about, the thing that we will probably, we're already seeing the makings of coming to a neighborhood near you soon, is internment camps, right? And we asked a question about
Wow.
that. Like, the federal government should place immigrants who are in the country illegally in internment camps. We actually used the term guarded by the U.S. military until they can be deported. 62% of Republicans, 56% of white evangelicals are, yeah, that's a policy we can get behind.
And yeah, for those who haven't followed Robbie's work, you've been asking these questions for 10 years, and you keep telling me, you keep looking. We talked about this. I think we were in Chicago, maybe 2 years ago, and you were like, you still haven't found the bottom yet, but you were
Yeah.
confident you could find the bottom. And then you're seeing ICE agents, National Guard, the military being unleashed in LA against American residents and citizens. They've arrested a pregnant woman, 9 months pregnant, who was a citizen. They're arresting legal residents. They've gone to preschools. They've gone. How about when? Did you ask them about children,
We've
Robbie?
asked, we didn't ask about children, although we did ask before. Let's not forget, right, that the whole family separation thing, that was Trump 1.0,
That's
right?
right.
That we had all that, and we did ask about that, and even there, white evangelicals and Republicans stood out as the groups that were, less bothered by the even those horrific, family separation, and these are again like family values, right? The party of family values, the religion family values, and yet, they're less bothered by this than other groups are. And one other thing I'll say about the violence piece here is that we should just be really clear. You kind of link this to the Vance Bolter thing.
Yeah.
Uh, this is absolutely a problem on the right. Like, all of the data is like very, very clear that overwhelmingly, it's not that no people on the left support these views, but it is no contest, right? And it is what political scientists call asymmetric polarization. So yes, we're
Yeah.
divided, but it's not even, right? It's like Democrats and Republicans are over here, and I'm sorry, Democrats and independents are over here, and Republicans are the outliers, right? On all these policies, like on that policy we had about that first question about rendition and no due process. I mean, the distance between independents and Republicans on that are more than 30 percentage points, right? So this is just huge gulf, and they have been kind of groomed by this president. And this is the president that talked about immigrants. I know you've talked about this. I wrote about it as vermin, right? This
Yep.
is like not just like sort of like Nazi talk.
No,
This
that's
is
Hitler. That's
straight
Hitler quote.
out of Mein Kampf. Like, it is literally quoted from Mein Kampf. Vermin poisoning the blood of the country. These are the kind of language that you use to desensitize people to other people's humanity. It absolutely does pave the road to violence. And so, going to Vance Boltner, right? So he attended Christ for the Nations Institute in Dallas, which is a NAR, National New Apostolic Reformation affiliated kind of school, and that Pentecostal charismatic world. And what's notable about that is that it is the kind of Christian worldview, evangelical worldview, that does it literally demonizes its political opponents, right? So it
Mm.
constructs a world in which uh, your political opponents aren't just people that you disagree with; they are literally agents of Satan, right? And so when you really you can't think of anything that would break the bonds of a democratic uh, you know, country more than not being able to see your fellow citizens. It's just people you maybe have a disagreement with, you're going to debate. But these are people that ultimately have to be eliminated, right, for God's will to be affected. He actually preached a sermon. This is something I think the mainstream media has reported on a little bit, but it hasn't come through as much as I'd like. Vance Bolter was showing up in the Democratic Republic of Congo preaching sermons
I've
and
seen those videos.
saying Satan is going to judge America. He's going to raise up apostles, to kind of correct America from its wayward path, and calling it evil, right? So this is the worldview.
Well, on that news, no, but this is something that has been part and parcel of the right wing movement. And I'm so happy you called out the asymmetrical type of nonsense. There's no both sides. It's
Yeah,
asymmetrical one side that has been polarized and radicalized and pushed towards violence and conspiracy theories, right? Of course, they exist all across the board, but we don't see this on the quote unquote left. You don't see this with Democrats. You don't see this with centrists. You see this now with the modern Republican Party. And I was having a conversation with the progressive host about Brian Tyler Cohen. And, we were talking about the Earth 3 that Republicans live on, thanks to the hermetically sealed bubble, which
yeah,
is their information ecosystem, which is deeply incestuous. But, up is down, left is right, Earth is flat, vaccines are terrible. Donald Trump won the 2020 election. I believe 80% of registered Republicans still believe that. And now you're giving this number of
yeah,
65 to 75% of Republicans are perfectly fine with innocent brown individuals being renditioned to Guantanamo without due process, and which has already happened. 238 brown folks got renditioned to El Salvador, including Abrego Kilmar Garcia, without any due process, any proof of crimes. And they're sitting there right now in a foreign gulag in El Salvador, in CICOT, right, away from their families. And we sit there and we go, this is horrific. And they say, no, this is necessary. And also, the people who are shocked, Robbie, I remember during the lead up to the election, if you call it the RNC, deport now, right? That
mm,
was the number one slogan they all had, and they at the same time they also had the Christ, the cross right there, and you see
yeah.
the cross with Kristi Noem, and you see the cross with Caroline Levitt, as they're not just lying. Literally
And,
today, I don't know
and
if you
Pam
saw the
Bondi,
news.
Pam
Yeah,
Bondi is
Pram Bondi with the
43.
cross right
Yeah,
there. They literally again lied. The Homeland Security DHS Twitter profile folks lied yet again about Brad Lander, the New York City comptroller who was arrested
mm,
simply for asking a question. They lied and said he assaulted ICE agents. Folks, we have eyes, we can see. Lying is a sin. And so you're a person who has studied Christianity. You're a person from the church. You're a person from the South, and you've written excellent books. People should go check out Robbie's books, trying to explain to everyone else how someone who's a true believer, like
yeah,
truly believes that Jesus is their savior. They're in it. They read the Bible. How can they sanction such cruelty in the name of Jesus? Those numbers that you just told me are horrifying, especially as we've seen in the past week, this violence unfolding before our eyes.
yeah. Well, look, I grew up Southern Baptist in Mississippi, right? And I think one thing I can testify to use a church term, is that this is not new. And I think people are in some ways shocked and think, but you know, uh, I opened up my previous book called White Too Long. I opened that book with a line that said, "Look, the denomination which I grew up was founded on the proposition that enslaving people based on the color of their skin was compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Mm.
That was its founding principle." And that denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention, went on to become the largest expression of Protestant Christianity in the country. At its height, when I was in my sort of teens and early 20s, we were 16 million strong, our single denomination, right? And so it was the largest expression. So when you sort of just stop for a moment and take that history, and that becomes the dominant expression of Protestant Christianity in the country, it becomes a little less surprising. And when you recall, we had people like James Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr. and even Frederick Douglass, way back, saying things like, in the appendix of his autobiography, he says, between the Christianity of America and the Christianity of Christ, I see the widest possible difference. The
Mm.
slave auctioneer's bell and the church bell ring together. And he even talks about, we have, slaves being sold to buy Bibles, like those kinds of
Yep.
contradictions, right? So this is in our DNA, and it's not all of who we are, but it is and has been who we are. And I think we're seeing this kind of fighting it out, right? Of who do we want to be as a country, and inside the church, who do we want to be as a church? Like which faith, which version of Christianity is going to win out? Is it going to be the slave owner's religion, or is it going to be, a religion that can embrace pluralism, a religion that can embrace democracy and freedom for everybody?
We just got breaking news that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was transported to the transported by ambulance to DC area hospital. No further details. Because I'm not a sociopath and I don't need people to suffer in order to feel great again. I will say I hope she heals, and as she is having this moment, which seems quite serious as breaking news, I hope she has a come to Jesus moment and reflects upon what she's doing to innocent individuals and communities as the head of Department of Homeland Security. I say that with utmost sincerity. As a person who's had a near-death experience, nothing gives you clarity in life than a near-death experience. So let's hope that she's safe and she wakes up and realizes, what? As I have this cross hanging around my neck, maybe I can actually read the New Testament and see what the other prophets did. But this marriage between the cross and violence, cross and white supremacy, right? You and I have talked about this, and I've been mentioning this a lot recently, especially with the election of Trump and the viciousness against the
Yeah.
undocumented, against the critics, is the twin sins of America have always been white supremacy and greed. And you see now Trump as the avatar of that on steroids. And it
Yeah.
seems like these twin sins that you've written about a lot, we've as a country have been unable and unwilling to confront and uproot. What will it take to crack this nut? Because, doing interfaith that you and I have done, I find it easier talking to, believe it or not, pro-Israel Zionist Jews and finding some commonality, at least in America. But the hardest nut to crack is that nut that you just described,
Yeah.
which is the base of the Republican Party that refuses, no matter how cruel Trump is, they are with him. You've done all the numbers, 75 to 80%. They do not leave. And this latest poll, yep, rendition them. Yep, send them away. Yep, have moats. Yep, let some people die. How do we crack this nut, Robbie? Because I don't have the answer.
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer either, but I will say this: like when you look at, this is what gives me some hope. We have to remember that elections only tell like a very distorted picture of who the country is, right? Because of who votes and who doesn't vote in this country, right? So we had nearly 4 in 10 Americans who didn't vote in the last election, which means that like the election ended up being split between 30% here and 30% here, right? And this other there were more people not voting than voted for either one of the candidates that were actually in the election. So and you see that reflected in the polls. So if you look at, even these numbers, I mean, we're talking about how high the Republican numbers, but it's worth noting that Americans as a whole oppose this rendition without due process by 2 to 1. It's not close. It's not
No.
51-49 or 55-45. It's 2 to 1. When you ask about Christian nationalism, like the support for Christian nationalism is much higher than we'd hope it was. It's a majority of Republicans. It's 2/3 of white evangelicals that affirm this message of white Christian nationalism.
Can you define before you go,
Yeah.
Robert? Because what's common to you isn't common to others. Can you define for people who are watching? I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. What Christian nationalism is?
Yeah. So for us, and you can go to PRI.org. We break it all down. It's all transparent. You can see exactly the methodology there. But we follow a lot of work in the social sciences, and we basically define it with a handful of questions. So we're not just picking one, but it's agreement with a whole cluster of questions that are things like the U.S. law should be based on Christian values. To be truly American, you must be Christian. If we don't get back to our Christian roots, we won't have a country anymore. It's like those kinds of sentiments that are really Christian supremacy and privileging Christianity. And so, if you agree with all of those questions strongly or even somewhat strongly, we can characterize you as leaning toward and characterize you as a Christian nationalist. And so those are the you can again we got whole studies on this. You can see it at PRI, but it's only 3 in 10 Americans that affirm those statements, right? That means again 2 to 1 Americans reject that worldview. Now the problem is that third is big enough to have captured one of our 2 political parties. Like that's really what we're seeing, right? An outsized capturing of one of our 2 political parties. If we were a country, a European country that had 5, 6 political parties, we'd have a Christian nationalist party and it would have 30% of the country in it, right? And it would have to be forming coalitions with other people on the right. But because we have this binary political system, it's just taken over one of our 2 political parties. But I think realizing that there are far more Americans who affirm a pluralistic view of the country, who affirm basic constitutional values, and we just got to figure out how to bring those people together and and be loud, right? But in this moment, when the levers of power have been captured by this 1/3 of the country.
And that 1/3 of the country is getting increasingly unhinged. And there
Yeah.
was last time I talked to you, Robbie, it was a couple of months ago, where there was what I thought was the most disturbing PRI poll until this latest one, which, the language that Tucker Carlson used, and now you've seen Mel Gibson use ever since the election, you've seen Byron Donald use, talking about Donald Trump, this vulgarian criminal, a man who was, literally held liable for rape and defamation, calling him their daddy. And you saw that rally where Tucker Carlson compared Donald Trump to a daddy who's come home, who's angry, and he's going to give America a spanking, right? I'm not making this up.
Oh
And he
yeah.
compared America to a little girl, and he went in detail and depth about it, and people were applauding. And then you, through PRI, did another like just fascinating poll where like this type of paternalistic misogyny is is a great indicator for people who are more amenable to right-wing authoritarianism. Can you
Yeah.
break that down? Because I see this happening in real time, and this was just in the last couple of months.
Yeah. Well, once again, we see so we've done some careful polling on authoritarianism as well, using very similar. And what's notable about this, we actually drew on research that was first created in the wake of World War II by social scientists who were trying to figure out like how do we explain the rise of Hitler and fascism in Europe, and so we kind of built on those measures that were developed there. And we find that Christian nationalism and fascism and sort of authoritarianism in the U.S. go hand in hand, right? This is again a problem on the right. It's not a problem on the left. It is absolutely correlated with kind of Republican Party ID. It's correlated with political conservatism. It's correlated with Christian nationalism. And again, again, but it's only about it's a little higher than Christian nationalists, but it's only about 4 in 10 Americans that you could kind of qualify that are kind of susceptible to an authoritarian view. But again, it's a majority of Republicans, right? So it's a kind of super majority of white evangelical Protestants that we've seen. But I think this sense of it's all kind of keyed to a kind of a story, a narrative about just destruction, right? That the country's going to hell in a handbasket. I alone can fix it. It's that kind of thing. And again, it's keyed to evil. It's a binary story of good versus evil. Democrats are evil. We are on the side of God. God is on our side. And so when you have God on your side, we've learned this over and over, right, in history. When you've come to a place where you are utterly convinced that God is on your side for a political agenda, violence always follows, right? And we can absolutely see that in the data. Those who are classified as authoritarian on those scales, those who classified as Christian nationalists on those scales, are about 3 times as likely to say that they believe political violence may be necessary to save the country as those who score lower on those scales. And so we're seeing that play out.
Yeah, you feel you're under threat. You feel you're the
Yep.
victim. Right-wing media gives you a constant grievance narrative. There's always a new boogie person. They're coming after your kids. They're coming after your pronouns. They're coming after M&Ms. They're coming after Little Mermaid. They're coming after our borders. They're invaders. You dehumanize them with dehumanizing language, right? Caravan, invaders, rapists, criminals, Haitians eating dogs and pets. Once you dehumanize them
Yep.
and call them, and then you promote conspiracy theories like QAnon, where you say they're led by a cabal of international sex traffickers that, like, I'm not making this up, folks, that groom children and prey on them and sexualize them. Then it becomes very easy to rationalize the use of violence to repel this evil demonic force in order to save your country. And also, you have been chosen by God to purge and purify this land, this chosen land of America, from this demonic force, right? And we're seeing that in real time with them now associating with Donald Trump, the most godless, like I would call him, if he was a biblical figure, I would say the Pharaoh, the modern Pharaoh, that they have attached their hopes and dreams to this man, and they see him as, what did Kirk Cameron say? Yes, he's a sinner, he's not perfect, but God also chose the
Mm.
Persian pagan King Cyrus. Can you just, because people, you and me, we come from religious communities, we understand this. For people watching, they still to this day, like, how can they choose Trump? I don't get it. Can you explain that through line?
Yeah, I've got a couple of like little things that have stuck in my head over time. I probably spent more time answering this question maybe any other of the last 10 years. And just it has been 10 years, right, that we've been wrestling.
Yep.
But here's what I think is going on. So I wrote a book in 2016 called The End of White Christian America. And it was a demographic book. And it was really charting the fact that we had crossed this demographic threshold. And that was in the last 20 years, we have gone from being a country that is majority white and Christian to one that is no longer majority white and Christian. And that, I think, has led to what we are seeing. And I only half jokingly use this term, but the great white Christian freakout moment, right? That
Yep.
Trump has manipulated and absolutely leveraged here. And it's notable that we crossed that demographic threshold while we had our first African American president, our first
Yep.
non-white president. And so we had the symbol in the White House who was not just elected, but reelected, right? Wasn't a fluke. Something different's going on. At the same time, we're crossing this demographic threshold. And it has in American history, I think people often think of it just about race, but in American history, the dominant culture that's been protected has always been ethno-religious, right? It's always been white and Christian. That's the thing that the KKK was protecting, right? So why was the KKK? They're not just anti-black, right? They're anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish, right? And of course, anti-Muslim, right? But why was that? What makes all of that make sense? Well, it's only makes sense not just that they're anti-white or anti-black, but they are pro-Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian country, right? That's what it's always been about, and that's what's being protected. So I think this sense that the country, for the first time in its history, actually is having to live into the pluralism it so long said it supported. And suddenly, it's easy to be generous when you have such a majority, you have lock on power. But suddenly, when you say you are for pluralism and you say you're for religious liberty, and suddenly you find yourself not in the majority, it's a different thing. And I
The
think
white
Trump has
flash, right?
Trump has
Replacement
just
theory.
exploited this fear of a changing country and this kind of grasp, to hang on, this desperate grasp to hang on to power.
And we've seen them use Donald Trump as their avatar, as their vehicle, right? As a born again actor, Dennis Quaid said, "He might be an asshole, but he's my asshole." That's
Yeah.
an actually direct quote from Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid, you used to be so good. Look what they made you give, Dennis Quaid, and John Voight, and so many others. Trump corrupts because that's what happens with fascism. But you mentioned something, bringing back full circle about you're still on the search to see where the bottom is, right? Surely there has to be an off ramp. Surely Trump
Yeah.
can do something, Robbie, that makes someone who, because I know these people, they're on my street, by the way. They go to my community pool. These are like white Christians who held their nose and voted for Trump, and their kids play with my kids. And it's interesting. We have these conversations. I don't hide who I am. But they say, we don't like him and he's horrible. But I think some of them this time around, when it came between Trump and voting for a black woman, they haven't told me, but I could tell they probably voted for Trump. What do you think? Does Trump have to convert to Islam? Does he have to be pro-abortion? Like what will it take? And we can only guess, but you've spent your entire life researching about these communities. You came from these communities. What will it take for them to finally say, and it could also be, maybe it could be pain. Like maybe it could be them losing their home, losing Social Security, losing Medicaid. But then again, I think, Robbie, this pain, because I don't have amnesia, happened in the first administration, where there was a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans, and Donald Trump openly lied to the American public, and they openly promoted eugenics and herd immunity. And as people were literally dying from COVID, they still hung on to Trump. So what will make them say, I'm no longer a believer in you, Don.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I fear, I have to say, is that, uh, like, and again, like, as academics that we're trained, like, never to reach for the, inflammatory, hyperbolic example. But I'm going to say like
This is
this.
a safe space. Reach away.
But I really do think we may be in a place where it is only in retrospect that people are going to find a conscience. Uh,
Mm,
and I think so much about Nazi Germany, Italian fascism. Um, you know, People find ways of rationalizing. Hannah Arendt wrote, pretty compellingly about the psychological process that once you give in to the lie, once you sort of cave, like the road back gets further and further distant in the rearview mirror, like in a logarithmic way, right? Not linearly. And so I think the sort of off ramps are very hard to come by. Like once you've got, yeah, 2/3 of the Republican Party and white evangelicals still telling us today, sure, the election was stolen, right? Despite 60 lawsuits lost, no evidence, of that, and that he turned that into he successfully turned that into a litmus test, even for political appointments in the
yeah.
Senate. Let that happen, right? And so I think once people sort of give themselves over to that lie, it's very, very hard to come back. And it may be only this is what I like really worried about, and why I think it's so important for us to all be loud, be and speak earlier than later. Is that it's only when you've got a pile of bodies in the background that you suddenly find the conscience and you think, oh, like we let that happen. And I
Yeah. One
really hope
day
we don't end up there.
th- that the author Omar al that wrote this tweet that went viral, and he wrote a good book. One day we will have all been against this.
Yeah.
Speaking about the genocide in Gaza, speaking about the dead bodies and how people kept quiet, and now it's the war spread to Iran, and God forbid it could spill over and cause a regional crisis. But the final question I have for you, Robbie, is: with that being said, then should people reach out? How do you deal with this? Because what I've said to you, and I've said this on this show, and
Yeah.
I've said this publicly on CNN and MSNBC, I said this on Chris Hayes' show, I think 8 years ago, during the first Trump administration, is I said, and I think Chris was a bit taken aback by this because Chris was still hoping that pain would bring enough people back, right? Trump's failures. I said, I believe we've lost about 25 to 30% of America for my lifetime. We've lost them. They're not coming back. They live on an Earth 3. They're in the hermetically sealed bubble. They've been radicalized. They don't have horns on their head. I cannot reach them. They believe what they believe. And no matter what we do, no matter how nice I am, no matter how much I give them biryani, no matter how much I buy expensive Pakistani mangoes and cut them slices, no matter how much their kids play with my kids, they're lost. But we have 70%. And so some people still say, yeah, you just got to reach out. You got to be nicer. You got to meet them halfway. I ask you, with this group, you've been studying them now specifically for 10 years since the rise of Trump. The numbers are lock solid. 70 to 80%, right? Like maybe if you're lucky, 66%. Those numbers are locked in, Robbie. I've been reading your polls for a
Yeah.
while now. What do we do with them?
Yeah, and I think about, my people, right, from the South and Southern Baptists, evangelicals, people I grew up with, and just I drink very deeply at that well. I mean, I went to a Baptist college, I have a degree from a Southern Baptist seminary, right? I mean, this is deep in my bones. They're lost.
Mm,
They're just lost. And I mean that not just in the sort of uh, regular everyday way. I mean that in the deep theological. We used to sing songs about like Amazing Grace. Once I was lost, now I am found. I mean this in the deepest theological way. They are lost. They have lost themselves in this evil, and it's really the main way to say it. And, while there are some around the edges that I think, yes, we absolutely should pull them over, right? But there comes a time, right? And I think we're in one of those times when you have to kind of call it out and you have
yeah,
to kind of name it, right, for what it is. And these are people who are out to destroy democracy. They're not acting in goodwill. They're not acting in good faith. And you think about building a bridge, I mean, and you want as many people helping you work on the bridge, but you can't invite people to work on the bridge by the day if they're going to go tie dynamite to the pilings at night. right? And so but I think it's a great act of discernment. I don't have any, silver bullet answers here, any easy answers, but I think there's a way we've got to figure out how to say like a great no, right, to that worldview, right, and to say like this is beyond the pale, this is beyond like our democratic principles, like this is beyond, and for those of us who are Christian, I think we got to say like this is beyond the faith, right? This is
Mm.
beyond the bounds of our faith, right? And you're not going to be able to just like have us help. We're not going to like collude with you in pretending that this, is an authentic representation of our faith. We're going to have to call it out.
Amen. I've come to that conclusion as well. And the analogy I use ever since COVID is we have to inoculate the majority in quarantine, this 25 to
Yeah,
30%, right? Not crush them, kill them, quarantine them. And the rest of us have to move on because I agree with you. Having spent so much time in this, having taken some arrows, I don't think you can crack that nut. And, as a 44-year-old man who's exhausted with three kids, how much of my life should I spend? Right, Robbie? How much of my time should I spend? And so the analogy I gave to someone earlier today is the caravan, it must move forward. And if we can put 70% on the caravan, then the best that I can do at this moment is the caravan will move forward. The door will be always open. It's up to you to jump in. The door will be open. It's up to you to jump in.
that's the thing.
And
That's right. I think we move forward. We embrace democracy. We move forward. We protect democracy. And if we can do that, and I do think that's an if, right, that has yet to be seen. If we can do that, I do think there is a significant portion that will come along, but only after they have like just lost, right? At the ballot box, decidedly lost in the culture, and I do think they'll finally come along. A chunk of them will, at least, but I think it's going to take like a resounding no and a resounding defeat from the rest of us to kind of drag them, this direction. I mean, this is essentially what happened with civil rights in many ways, right? That I mean, the dominant white Christian world did not willingly come along
nope.
with civil rights. It was laws that got passed, courts that enforced them, even the National Guard that got called in from time to time to kind of fix it and enforce those laws, and then suddenly. Those recalcitrant white Christians began to rethink their theology, right? Once the culture had moved past them.
And dragged, kicking, and screaming. And even then, many of them did not accept it, right? And I think that's a great analogy that those original sins of America are reappearing because we never confronted them and dismantled them, and literally, figuratively, I'm talking about suffocated them metaphorically, right? You have to just quarantine them, let them be, and move on, and then it's up to them. Do you want to get left behind? Or do you want to join the rest of us? And if you want to left behind and suffer and self destruct in your hate, you can't save people who refuse to be saved, Robbie. You know this, and I know this, both from a theological point of view and a literal point of view. Robbie, I kept you longer than I thought, but you were on a roll. Folks who have joined us late, there's 1,300 people. This 40-minute conversation, nearly 40-minute conversation, I'll have up in an hour or two. If you're watching Robbie Substack, we'll have it up in an hour with a transcript. I strongly recommend you listen to all of it. Robbie's done all the work through PRRI. He has the polls, the data, the numbers that show you repeatedly for past 10 years. We have lost about 25 to 30% of this country, and the right wing, specifically Republicans, voters, and white Christian evangelicals, they're with Trump till the end, even if that end means them, and they're increasingly fine with violence. They're increasingly fine with the utmost cruelty against our immigrants, immigrant kids, even if it includes rendition without due process. Robbie's work has been fantastic. Robbie, before I let you go, shamelessly promote yourself. How can people read you, find you? How can people see these latest polls, which I will link to?
Great. Thanks so much. Well, all the polls are up at prri.org. That's PRI's homepage. You can find them all there. We actually just launched a new website, so you can find them, and it should be fairly straightforward to get to what you need. You can also follow me at whitetolong.net on Substack, and my latest book is The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future.
It's a fantastic book, and those who are watching Left Hook for the first time, I'm a fool, but I'm not an idiot. I've kept everything for free. There are no paywalls. You pay what you can. It's like Blanche Dubois, depend on the kindness of strangers. So if you are a subscriber, consider becoming a paid subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, it's free. What have you got to lose? And share this content. Join Robbie's Substack, and later on at 9 p.m., because I'm a masochist, I'm going to come back for another live Substack. I'm going to have Trita Parsi and Adam Weinstein, two experts on Iran and the Middle East, talk about what's happening right now, what to expect with United States, it seems, joining Israel's disastrous war in Iran. What will be the blowback? How will it impact the region, Israel, Palestinians, Iran, and U.S. security? That's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern time today. But folks, be informed, take care of yourselves, be kind, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Robbie, always a pleasure, sir. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Waj.
Take care, buddy.